was Al Capone, and what kind of life did he lead? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Hello, I'm Alex, and welcome to the History Chronicles. If you like our work, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel in return for exclusive perks, please visit our Patreon page. Now, on with the video. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on the 17th of January 1899 in Brooklyn, New York, in the United States of America. His father was Gabriel Capone, who immigrated from Angri, a village just outside of Naples in southern Italy, with his wife and Alphonse's mother, Teresa Capone, born Teresa Raiola, who would have 9 children together, eventually immigrating in Brooklyn in 1893, with their first residence being 95 Navy Street, before moving on to Park Slope in Brooklyn when Alphonse was 11. When he started school, Alphonse showed promise as a student, but he struggled with his strict Catholic background and would be expelled from school at the age of 14 for striking a female teacher, although his education into the criminal world was just beginning. Surrounded by criminal influences, such as gangster Johnny Torrio, it was no surprise when Al then graduated to gang life, joining small-time gangs such as the Brooklyn Rippers, and eventually the most powerful gang of all, the 5 Points Gang in Lower Manhattan. By 1917, Al's mentor was Frankie Yale, who was a bootlegger and protection racketeer, and from the funds from his protection operation, he opened up a bar called the Harvard Inn in Coney Island, where Al worked for Frankie, gaining knowledge and insights of the criminal world. It was during this time that Al would gain the nickname Scarface, when he was working as a doorman at the Harvard Inn under Yale, and got into a fight with a local gangster, Frankie Galluccio, after inadvertently upsetting his vivacious and beautiful sister Lena, resulting in a drunken confrontation where Galluccio slashed Capone with a knife, leaving a noticeable scar on the left side of his face. Despite his journey into a violent underworld, family was everything to Capone, like many Italian-American gangsters of this time. And so when Al's girlfriend May Josephine Coughlin gave birth to Al's son Albert Francis Sonny Capone in December 1918, the only thing to be done was for the pair to marry, which they did a short time later on the 30th of December. Shortly after his marriage to May, Al was asked by Johnny Torrio to make the move to Chicago, and Al was happy to oblige his friend, as well as make a new start for him and his family in the Windy City. And so in 1919, Capone left Brooklyn for Chicago and began working as a bouncer in a brothel where he contracted syphilis, where Al never sought treatment until it was too late. Meanwhile, in 1923, Al purchased a small house at 7244 South Prairie Avenue in Park Manor on the south side of the city and began making his name as a boxing promoter. But this was merely a cover, as in reality, he was working for a crime organization headed by Johnny Torrio. At the height of the Prohibition era, the Chicago Outfit, or South Side Gang as it was also known, was a growing illicit organization, consisting of illegal stills and breweries protected through bribes by politicians, as well as law enforcement. As well as this, the racket the gang had in operation would target businesses who refused to buy the illicit liquor, with up to 100 people losing their lives in subsequent bombings during the 1920s. Capone had a posh off with a high life, wearing expensive bespoke suits, smoking cigars and eating only the best food. He also had a liking for female company and was also known to wear expensive, showy jewellery and revelled in the attention he received, such as being cheered at his arrival at ball games, and felt he was a modern-day Robin Hood. However, in 1923 a change had come about in the form of political reform, as in Chicago the reformist William Emmett Dever was appointed mayor, and to avoid potential interference and investigation, Capone and Torrio decided to move their base of operations to the Chicago suburbs and the town of Cicero, Illinois. And so, Al Capone based himself and the rest of his South Side gang there to continue their criminal activities. They set up illicit brothels, speakeasies and gambling dens, and expanded the liquor operation to supply all of Cicero's saloons, even using bribery and intimidation to take over local town elections, such as the 1924 Cicero municipal elections. And this veneer of respectability made it difficult for the North Side gang, the South Side's sworn enemies, to get to him, and was an opportunity for Capone not only protect himself, but also to prevent the election of more reformist politicians. Terror escalated on election day of the 1st of April, when the voters faced submachine guns and sawn-off shotguns at the polling booths to ensure their votes were cast for Klenner. and when their votes were for him, they were allowed to vote multiple times. But for those who resisted, they were either prevented from voting or beaten. And even Rudolf Hirt, a Democrat then standing for mayor, was also targeted, whose campaign office was sprayed with gunfire. This resulted in a change of the hierarchy of the Northside Gang, and it was now headed by Jaime Weiss, who had himself narrowly escaped an attempt on his life in the Chicago Loop in the early 1920s, where, with the help of his second-in-commands, Vincent Drucke and Bugs Moran, and O'Banion, who had been a good friend of Weiss, the Northsiders had only one thing on their mind: revenge. But this was just the beginning of what would be a 5-year gang war. And so, in January 1925, it came as no surprise when first Capone was ambushed, leaving him unharmed but shaken up by the experience. And then only 12 days later, Torrio was himself shot, where he decided to effectively resign, handing control of the Chicago outfit, as it was known, to Capone at the age of only 26. The continuation of the turf wars prompted a further security measure when Capone began spending more time away from Chicago. During his life, Capone used political alliances to his advantage. For example, he supported William Hale Thompson with a donation of $250,000 when the Republican candidate for the 1927 mayoral election for Chicago hinted in his campaign that he would allow illegal drinking saloons to be reopened, which would be a major opportunity for Capone's illegal bootlegging business. Bugs Moran was a thorn in the side of Capone, the well-known and now leader of the Northside Gang following the death of Jaime Weiss, who was previously shot and killed in 1926, although this came to a head on the morning of Thursday the 14th of February 1929, on the day of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Capone had hatched a plan against Moran by renting an apartment across the road from Moran's headquarters and watching the movements of his men. Capone arranged for a phone call on the 13th which told Bugs there was to be a delivery of whiskey from Detroit the following day at a bargain price. So he agreed and asked for the delivery at 10:30 a.m. the next morning. But when the truck arrived, Capone lined up 7 of Bugs Moran's men against a wall, supposedly to search them, but when a signal was given, the men were mown down in cold blood by the accomplices' machine guns and shotguns. During 1929, attempts to bring Public Enemy No. 1 to justice were intensified, and on the 27th of March 1929, FBI agents arrested Capone as he left a courtroom after testifying to a grand jury investigating Prohibition law violations. The charge they brought was the feigning of illness, which he had used to avoid earlier prosecution. And then on the 16th of May 1929, Capone was arrested again, when in Philadelphia, on a charge of carrying a concealed weapon. This time, he was sent to trial and found guilty, and received a sentence of 1 year in prison. On the 8th of August 1929, Capone was sent to Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, and was released in March 1930. But in April 1930, Capone was next arrested on vagrancy charges. But after a 3-day trial in July, he was found not guilty, although in the following September, a court judge issued a warrant on charges of vagrancy once again, which ultimately saw Capone sentenced to 6 months, but remained free as he had appealed the decision. The Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, chose Frank J. Wilson to investigate Capone's tax matters, as the law was using every which way to bring Capone to justice, focusing on his spending in relation to his stated income. And key to gaining a conviction would be finding proof of his income. And so when Capone offered to pay tax on an amount of income had thus been established. His lawyers had been ordered by Capone to get his tax position in good order, and so they declared income that was taxable for 1928 and 1929. And as he hadn't paid tax on that amount, the declaration was, in effect, an admission of guilt. And so on the 13th of March 1931, Capone was charged with income tax evasion for the year of 1924, and then on the 5th of June, Capone was indicted by a federal grand jury to stand trial on 22 counts of income tax evasion from 1925 to 1929, and was soon released on bail for $50,000. A week after this, the Prohibition agent Elliot Ness and his team were to become involved with the court process, and their evidence led to Capone's indictment on 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act, the act which detailed the Prohibition laws. On the 16th of June 1931, Capone stood before Judge James Herbert Wilkerson, and this time Al Capone pled guilty to income tax evasion, and also to the 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act, as part of a plea bargain deal in which he agreed to plead guilty in return for a sentence of 2.5 years. However, when it came to sentencing, Judge Wilkerson refused to honour the plea bargain, though he had dropped the Volstead Act prohibition-based charges, as tax evasion was a much more serious crime for him to be convicted upon. The defence was weak, to say the least, due to Capone's plea bargain being rejected, which his team of lawyers were unprepared for due to the sudden change of mind of the judge. And not only were the gambling losses reported by his lawyers, claiming Capone had lost a significant sum of money, considered admissible as a deduction from gambling winnings. However, as Capone's expenses showed, that money must have been available to pay for them. The extent of Capone's spending was outlined in court in great detail, and the charge was that $215,000 in taxes had been evaded on a gross income of $1,038,654 over a 5-year period. And so, on the 31st of October 1931, Al Capone was convicted on 3 counts of income tax evasion, resulting in him receiving a sentence of 11 years in federal prison at a fine of $50,000 plus $7,692 in costs. As well as this, he would also be liable for the $215,000 back taxes plus interest, where his sentence for contempt of court would be served concurrently. Ultimately, Capone was transferred to Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary to serve his sentence on the 3rd of May 1932 at the age of 33, weighing 250 pounds, and was diagnosed at this stage with both syphilis and gonorrhea. In Alcatraz in June of 1936, Capone was attacked in the laundry area by fellow inmate James Critterton Lucas, who was serving a life sentence. Lucas stabbed Capone in the back with a pair of scissors, but Capone was only superficially wounded, and so he was able to throw Lucas against the wall in retaliation, which saw Lucas spend time in solitary confinement as a punishment. During his time at Alcatraz, Capone's syphilis worsened, affecting his mental faculties until in February 1938 he was diagnosed formally with syphilis of the brain, and so the final year of his Alcatraz sentence was spent in the hospital ward of the prison. When he was released from Alcatraz on the 6th of January 1939, he was immediately transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution on Terminal Island in California to fulfill his sentence for contempt of court, and was given parole on the 16th of November 1939 when he appealed to the court on the grounds of his reduced mental capacity. On the 16th of November 1939, Capone was released from prison and was referred to the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. However, they refused to take him based on his reputation, and so he was instead admitted to the Union Memorial Hospital for the treatment of paresis. Capone left the Baltimore Hospital on the 20th of March 1940 to return home to Palm Island, and was lucky enough to be one of the first patients treated in America with the recently released drug penicillin. But although it was too late. During the final years in 1946, Capone was examined by a Baltimore psychiatrist, as well as his own physician, who concluded that he had a mental age of a 12-year-old. Although on the 21st of January 1947, Capone suffered a stroke, from which he initially started to recover, before contracting bronchopneumonia and suffering a cardiac arrest on the 22nd of January. And on the 25th of January 1947, he ultimately died of heart failure, while surrounded by his loved ones. A private funeral was held in Chicago a week later, and he was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Chicago, though he was exhumed and reinterred at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. And so, even after his death, Al Capone's legend would live on, his image and his characterization used to exemplify the American gangster to later generations. He became an iconic figure, and his image endures in films and publications to this day. You have been watching the History Chronicles. We'd love to know what you think of Al Capone. Please let us know below, and if you enjoyed our video, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, if you'd like to support our work going forward, please visit our Patreon page, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the History Chronicles.